I wore a microphone pretty much everywhere I went. We just clipped the conversations and put it out. Now, my social media following was a lot smaller than it ended up being at the end of the campaign, but still, that was just a way of putting out my message into the world. And what we started to notice was, most of those things would get relatively small reach, but in a few instances, there were a lot of interactions where people actually began to take interest, to say, wait a minute, that's an interaction of a kind that I haven't seen before. That's interesting to me. Some of them were not necessarily casting me in the most flattering light. I might not have looked good, right? Just even visually. The things that I would have said were sometimes a little bit unscripted, may not have been said as eloquently as I might have prepared for in a speech or a TV interview. But that was actually part of what made it appealing. And so that started to take off, I think, allowed the campaign. There were a couple moments, and then I happened to be in New York City, and they said, do you want to come on Don Lemon's show, right? Because many Republican candidates aren't going to go on there. So they thought they have a Republican candidate who's running. Why don't you go ahead and go on Don Lemon's show? We had a kind of interaction where this man went haywire. I had just given a speech at the NRA meeting, and he picked on one particular thing that I said, which is a fact of history, that Black Americans in the United States did not get to enjoy their civil rights until they actually had their Second Amendment rights. And the first anti-gun laws that were passed in the United States were designed to keep guns out of the hands of Black Americans. And that was part of a broader historical trend. And so in that case, anyway, I gave Don Lemon on air a history lesson, which caused him to, it ended up being a big favor for me on the campaign, lose his mind. The earpiece that he had in, he was screaming at the people who were the producers in his ears, saying it was distracting him as he was engaged in this debate with me. It was such an uncomfortable moment for everybody involved, including anybody watching it. My strategy ended up being, and it wasn't really a strategy, I think it's sort of how I'm wired. First was to do exactly what you said, just rationally process exactly what they're telling you and respond rationally. As the person on the other side increasingly loses their mind because you're not doing what they expected or planned or set you up to do, which in turn, I think, makes them look, far more illogical as a consequence when they were actually taking the ruffian populist Republican to try to make fry of them. Even for their own audience, they end up looking like the less reasonable ones. So I went to the Breakfast Club, had a major viral exchange there where a woman, she was pressing me hard on the fact that I had only ever really had major accomplishments in the business world, that had never been in public service, with utter unawareness that the last, and I believe, successful president of the United States, Donald Trump, came with a very similar background.
The game is, we will poke and prod at you with ill-informed but provocative opinions, hoping that by being as annoying as possible, you will say something fatally stupid, demolish your reputation online, and elevate my reputation, the journalist, as an investigator who can then walk away with, like, your scalp, so to speak, on his belt. Now, and so that's the kind of interview you face, where every single word the interviewer utters is a verbal trap. Okay, but my experience has been that if you keep your head during that interchange and you don't play the game, so you don't say anything stupid, you don't apologize, you don't get upset, that can turn viciously in your favor.
Don Lemon's firing. I had an exchange with Chuck Todd where he said, how can you have the level of certainty that there are two genders? And I explained in the manner of somebody who happens to have a biology degree, which I don't usually like using. You don't need a biology degree to know something about biology. You don't need to have a Harvard degree to be able to have standing to speak on a subject of science. But I have those things. And for an audience that particularly wrongfully elevates their attachment of value to those degrees, I decided to use that in my favor and broke down for him. Here's what two X chromosomes mean. Here's what an X and a Y chromosome mean. And that exchange went viral as well. And I think this one was more by chance, but he quickly was no longer on the air at Meet the Press, which was his main show shortly after I had done the same thing with Don Lemon. Shortly after, we had exchanges like that at the Breakfast Club.